The film begins with Frank and Tani, who are currently on their way to a deal. During the handover in a rundown apartment, there are some disagreements as the potential customers don't seem to be satisfied with the quality of the merchandise. The atmosphere quickly becomes tense, and Frank and Tani apply pressure until the customers eventually give in and pay for the consumables. This effectively and directly communicates to the audience the kind of individuals we're dealing with when it comes to Frank and Tani. After the successful deal, they head over to Frank's girlfriend, Vic. You see, Frank has a gift for her, and it's a gigantic plush gorilla. However, this isn't the main purpose of the visit. Vic is primarily being visited to pick up more merchandise that Frank has hidden at her place. We continue to accompany the two through the city center of Copenhagen while they engage in a lively conversation about who has put what, where, when, and how many times. The duo's current objective is to meet a woman named Rita, whom Frank tasks with procuring additional goods in Amsterdam. After all the hard work, Frank and Tani take a break and enjoy a meal together at a Chinese restaurant, engaging in playful banter. They goof around and have a good time. Once they've replenished their energy, they head to a nightclub for some evening entertainment. Here, they showcase their charm by approaching a woman at the bar. However, despite their repeated attempts, she declines their offer to buy her drinks. Talk about a tough crowd. The evening for our dynamic duo concludes in another location, where they enjoy a few drinks and engage in some lighthearted tomfoolery. The next day, Frank meets a Swede whom he knows from his time in prison. This Swede wants to acquire 200 grams of a particularly potent powder merchandise that starts with an H, and he wants it as soon as possible. That's a hefty order even for Frank, but he's eager to see what he can do. He doesn't want to miss out on such a big deal after all. Frank tries to procure the merchandise from Milo, a prominent figure in the local underworld. However, Milo is extremely dissatisfied with Frank because he still hasn't settled his previous debts from the last time he obtained merchandise on credit. Despite Milo's dissatisfaction, he eventually agrees to source the merchandise for Frank, enticed by the prospect of a lucrative deal. The next day, Frank picks up the merchandise from Milo and then waits with Tani in a parking lot where the exchange with the Swede is supposed to take place. When the Swede arrives, he asks Frank to get into his car. As the car suddenly starts moving, Frank finds it a bit unusual and feels uncomfortable. While they're in the car, about to complete the exchange, they are abruptly stopped by the police, and everything escalates quickly. Frank hastily jumps out of the car and starts running through the streets of Copenhagen. A heated foot chase ensues, but Frank manages to make it just in time to a lake, where he accidentally loses his brown merchandise in the water right in front of the eyes of the police officers. During the interrogation at the police station, Frank has absolutely and totally no idea what the officers want from him. They inform him that they have received a statement from his friend Tani, implying that Tani has betrayed Frank. Frank is visibly puzzled by this revelation but remains silent, refusing to say anything. Consequently, the police have to release him after 24 hours. Once free, Frank's first stop is Milo, where he must somehow explain why he neither has the money nor the merchandise. However, Milo doesn't believe his story and decides to increase Frank's debt beyond the originally agreed amount, making it clear that he won't be fooled by Frank. Before Frank starts collecting money, he pays a visit to his supposed friend and partner, Tani. This visit escalates into a heated debate between the two, but ultimately, Tani comes up short. Frank's arguments are simply more compelling. Afterward, it's time to collect the money. Frank, accompanied by Milo's right-hand man, Radovan, goes to one of his customers who owes him money. They intend to retrieve the debt with Radovan's assertiveness. However, the customer doesn't have the money, and during a brainstorming session, Radovan suggests that he can rob a bank to make up for the shortfall. This idea doesn't sit well with the others, and the customer, after a brief altercation, decides to abruptly and definitively end the whole affair. This frustrates Frank and Radovan, guaranteeing that they won't get their hands on the money. Frank's desperation becomes evident. He meets with Mike, an acquaintance from the underworld, to quickly obtain more merchandise. Together with his girlfriend Vic, Frank visits a nightclub. However, as the evening progresses, the mood turns sour because Frank can't hide his bad mood from her. The night ends at her place, where each of them indulges in their respective poison of choice to numb themselves. After aimlessly wandering around the city for a while, Frank calls Milo to inform him that he won't be coming over tonight. Milo lets Frank know that if he doesn't show up with the money tomorrow, he will never walk again. Clearly frustrated, Frank takes out his frustration on Vic, who had wanted to express gratitude for a gift from him. But in Frank's mind, there's no room for tender exchanges at the moment. The next day, Vic asks Frank if he will accompany her to the veterinary clinic because her dog is scheduled for surgery there. Reluctantly, he agrees to take her there but makes it clear that he doesn't have time to stay with her. As they are about to leave, Rita from the beginning, who was supposed to procure merchandise for Frank in Amsterdam, shows up. Naturally, she demands payment from him, to which he tries to put her off for later. However, their unproductive conversation is suddenly interrupted by Radovan and his entourage, who politely ask the two ladies to leave. Radovan puts pressure on Frank regarding the missing money, prompting Frank to offer the recently acquired white merchandise as a down payment. After a quick test, Radovan realizes that it is actually baking powder. That was not the kind of powder he was expecting, and he makes Frank feel his displeasure. Frank is now given a 2-hour ultimatum to come up with the money for Milo. The trip to the veterinary clinic with Vic is now off the table. Time is running against Frank, and he continues his efforts to collect money. However, the first attempt proves unsuccessful, leaving him increasingly tense and anxious. Next, he pays a visit to his mother. Frank engages in small talk with her reluctantly, as his main intention is to ask her for money. His mother naturally doesn't have such a large sum available, but he takes what he can get. The farewell between them is cold and distant. Frank now confronts Rita about why she gave him baking powder instead of the agreed-upon white powder. Lassa, a contact of Rita's, gets involved in the heated conversation as well. As the debate escalates, it turns out that neither of them has what Frank is looking for, and it's still in Amsterdam. They wanted to deceive him, precisely what he needed at the moment. Time is slipping away, and there is no sign of success in sight for Frank. He sets off to the hotel where he regularly stores things and promptly grabs a weapon from there to drive armed to Mike's location. Since Mike operates in the same business as Frank, he tries to forcefully take his money and goods by threatening him with the weapon. With this loot in hand, he heads to Milo. Upon arrival, he is greeted by Radovan, who promptly takes away his weapon. On the way to Milo, Frank tries to bribe Radovan to let him go, but to no avail. An unpleasant tension fills the air when they reach Milo's place. Frank makes it clear that he cannot repay the debt. Milo looks for a solution to this problem, and as a result, Frank's belongings with some value, such as his car, watch, and necklace, are taken from him. However, Frank does not have the money he just acquired with him and tells Milo that he has deposited it in a hotel. Milo wants Radovan to retrieve it, but Frank insists that he can only collect it personally. Milo is increasingly displeased with the mounting problems, and he decides to teach Frank a lesson. The frustration over Frank's behavior grows, leading to an increasingly intense lesson for him. But just before things can get drastically and unpleasantly worse for him, Frank is lucky enough to get hold of the pistol, which allows him to free himself. Frank manages to escape from there just in time to avoid further harm. He flees to Vic. There, he tells her about his plans to go into hiding, or rather, the necessity to do so. He asks her if she wants to come with him, and she doesn't seem opposed to the idea. They have chosen Spain as their destination. As they set off together, Frank makes a brief stop at the hotel where he stashed the stolen money. However, Radovan is already there. Inevitably, the two come face to face, and Frank manages to gain the upper hand. He is on the verge of putting an end to Radovan, but is prevented from doing so by the sudden appearance of an unexpected person. Frank and Vic's journey continues to a techno party. There, Frank attempts to sell the remaining merchandise he still has to partygoers. Just as he finds willing buyers, he receives a call from Milo. Milo feels that there is already too much talk about them and wants to wrap up the situation before it attracts any more attention. He offers Frank a deal. If Frank gives him all the money he has managed to gather, Milo will consider the matter closed. Frank is relieved by the offer and informs Vic that they won't be going to Spain after all since his problems have been resolved. However, while Frank is momentarily distracted, Vic reaches into his pocket and takes all of his money. He chases her, first through the club and out onto the street, but she escapes from him into a passing car, and he has no chance of catching up with her anymore. Frank is left with nothing, and we see preparations underway at Milo's for Frank's imminent arrival, which he would certainly not appreciate if he knew about them. Additionally, Mike is getting ready to retrieve the items that were stolen from him. The film ends with a visibly overwhelmed and lost Frank, now left alone, contemplating an uncertain future. It is up to the viewer to decide how Frank's fate will unfold. However, the signs are extremely unfavorable for him. Thank you for watching this recap of Nicholas Winding Refn's Pusher, a Danish cult film from 1996. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more, I would greatly appreciate a sub and a thumbs up. See you in the next one.